Would you please pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Grace and peace be with you on this day. So glad you made it, despite the rain. So glad you're here on this day. This is the day that the Lord has made, and we must take it as it is. For in it we will find a blessing. Paul's word, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. I got to tell you that I looked up several different translations. It's one of the things I like to do when preparing for sermon. Let's see what different translations say. See if there's one that I like better than another, or just to see if there's disagreement, or whether we agree on the same words and what they mean. And I found that two translations for today's passage in Paul's letter to the Romans. Does this work? What about now? Oh, the flick of a button. You see that? Thank you. Thank you, Doc. Two translations for today's scripture from Paul's letter to the Romans. Instead of saying, do not conform to the patterns, say, do not conform to the systems. And I thought about this, and I said, this is probably a closer translation, because when you think about the context of when this was written, Christians were people who were rebelling against a dominant culture, a dominant system. They were rebelling against the dominant culture and system of the Jewish temple. And a lot of the teachings, the message of Jesus is that you don't necessarily have to follow all the Mosaic laws and follow all the laws that are given by the temple, and that you don't have to do everything perfectly according to the Mosaic laws in order to know that God still loves you, in order to know that you are still a child of God, that God's grace transcends the Mosaic temple, the Mosaic laws. Or maybe Paul was talking about the Roman Empire. Maybe Paul was referring to the system set up by the Roman Empire. And if that was the case, he's actually a gutsy fellow asking people to do something that would put their life in jeopardy. Because to go against the Roman Empire could have cost you your life, right? And when he's saying do not conform to the system of the Roman Empire, do not conform to all the different gods and the different ways that they're asking you to live your life, those are rebellious words. Instead, be renewed, to be renewed by your mind. It's actually very revolutionary words for the time. Nowadays, this is basic 101. We're always telling our children to make up their own mind. We're always telling people to go ahead and think about it and be renewed by what you learn. Systems are only as good as the people who run them. Systems are only as good as the people who follow them. And there are lots of limitations to systems. For those of you who have been part of a hospital system, you know how frustrating that could be. Hospital systems, they've got a certain way they want you to be, and no matter what your ailment is, you always got to wear that robe where, your backside is showing. And you're like, but I'm here for my toe. Do I really have to, undress in that manner? And, the answer always tends to be yes. The hospital systems, many times, if you don't get with the jargon, if you don't get with the language, it could create a bit of awkwardness. It can get you to get into some sort of trouble. As a pastor and as a chaplain that I'm always visiting people at the hospital, I come across different scenarios that sometimes get to show how this system doesn't really quite fit perfectly. Like the one parishioner that I visited at the hospital, and she didn't really seem to be having a good morning. And then I looked at her and I go, well, what's going on? She goes, well, this breakfast wasn't really that good. And I put some of the jelly that they gave me to put on the biscuit, and it was just so bland. I knew hospital food was bad, but this is really bad. I go, well, what are you talking about? She goes, well, I'm talking about this Kentucky jelly they gave me. And I went, Kentucky jelly? Why don't you show me what it is? It was a bottle of KY jelly. Yes, I know. Or how about when their doctors are taking notes and you realize that the notes are really going to perpetuate what happens in the system? And one doctor wrote a note that said, patient has 2 teenage children but no other abnormalities. Patient does not have a fever, but husband claims that she was hot in bed last night. But hospital systems are not the only systems that are worthy of laughter. We also have government. Government is possibly the one to laugh at the most. In the 1980s, right outside of Macon, Georgia. Anybody here from Macon, Georgia? Because I'll change it right away to another city and state if you want me to. Outside of Macon, Georgia, there was an electrical sign over by the side of the highway that said, conserve energy. Think, all right, electrical sign, conserve energy. When we go to the DMV, driver motor vehicles, there we hit government systems at their best or possibly at their worst. At the DMV, it's just one of those things that you think you're going to be having a good time or maybe have a good experience. You'll be in and out, but chances are you'll be disappointed. Out of all of many different times I had to go to the DMV, I figured one year I was just too busy with the church and with my family and everything that I had to do. I said, this year I'm going to make an appointment. I'm going to beat everything to it, and I'm going to get there with an appointment. And I get to the DMV, make my appointment. I call, and they said, yes, we have an appointment. So then when I get there, I see this big, long line of people. They're all waiting in line. And I'm thinking to myself, aha, I beat the system. I have an appointment. And so I go and I show up, and I say, yes, I'm Guillermo Marquez-Sterling. And they said, who? I said, yeah, I have an appointment. And they said, oh, yes, you have an appointment. Okay. Yes, go ahead, take a number. And I go, take a number? What do you mean take a number? I have an appointment. And they said, yes, we understand. Won't you please take a number? And so I'm just now feeling besides myself, and I go ahead and take a number. I have to stand in line. 5 hours later, I'm just fuming. I'm fuming. And the picture that was taken of me just reflected that. Not my best. My smile, you're supposed to have that great smile, just looked like I was ready to bite somebody's head off. I said, you know what, I'm going to file a complaint. I'm going to do something about this. My whole day's been messed up. So I go ahead and I asked the person, I'd like to see your superior. I'd like to see whoever's in charge. And they said, okay, absolutely fine. And they get somebody over. And this woman comes over, and I said what my complaint was. And I told her, explained to her I had an appointment, and yet I had to take this number. And she goes, okay, I understand. And I said, so I'd like to file a complaint. And she goes, take a number. So, do not conform to the system. Sometimes the system has gotten so perfect, the system has gotten so ingrained that there's no other way. You have to. If you have to take a number, or if you have to do this, or else you're gonna miss the boat. And I know people who rebel against the system wholeheartedly. I've met some people who refuse to vote. They just do not vote. Not because they don't like one candidate or the other. They just say that our government system is in a bad shape, and they don't agree with our system. But yet they still live in our country, right? I'm hoping at least they pay their taxes. But I've met these individuals, and I always found it very interesting how they don't want to vote. And it kind of makes me wonder, okay, so how is this helping the system or not helping the system? How is this helping us as Christians or not? And then they talk about it as a matter of integrity and so forth. This could be argued in so many different ways, and I just tend to just sit there and smile. And, I just decided it's probably more important to be courteous and to be nice at this moment than to get into an argument. I've met individuals who would take this passage from Paul as do not conform to the patterns of the day, meaning to the patterns of society. So if the pattern is telling you to behave in a certain manner, dress in a certain manner, to do things in a certain manner, that Paul is telling us to be nonconformist. Well, our country already went through its nonconformist stage, right? We had all kinds of people who grew their hair long. all kinds of people who went ahead and had tattoos put on, all kinds of people who decided to wear their pants down low because they wanted to be different and be nonconformist. But if you hang in long enough, eventually your old traditional ways becomes the nonconformist. Because everywhere I look now, guys have their pants down low, their hair long, and their tattoos all over the place. And I have neither of those, so that means I'm a nonconformist. My old traditional ways are getting it. But maybe Paul is talking about something that's a little bit more substantial, something that's a little bit deeper. Maybe Paul is talking about something that goes to our core. And I have to link it now to other words in that passage. Present your body as a living sacrifice. Renew your mind. This has to do more with me as an individual. What is it that I present? What is it that I give? What is it that I offer? It's easier said than done. But this is a lifelong challenge that every aspect of our lives, every aspect of our being should become part of God's plan. That I use my hands to extend love and not to extend violence. That I use my words to encourage and not to put down. That I somehow live my faith through everything that I do, that my body would become a testament of my faith. That is probably the renewing they're referring to. Not so much the pattern of society that tells us exactly how we ought to live our faith. I always wonder if, for people who are stuck in patterns of worship, how things would be. Because, the church gets into patterns as well, too. And people in churches get into certain patterns that it's hard to break. Consider if I were to go ahead and ask you to change your seating arrangements on a certain Sunday. Would you even show up on that Sunday? Imagine if we were to go ahead and change the pattern of the worship service, which we have, and I did this summer. How is it that would go ahead and influence those who are sitting in the church? But let's take it even a little bit deeper. Imagine if the church itself decided to do something just a little bit different, to adapt itself to the changing times. I had to ask this question as I'm putting together confirmation for this new class that's coming up. And in the absence of Keith, I think I've got the opportunity to change it exactly and do it as I want, right? So I'm looking at what is it that our denomination has presented, and I'm looking at it and I'm going like, this is the same material. This is like the same thing. It's like, it's what was given to me or my generation. And I guess that's probably the point. That there's a certain aspect of our faith that has to be timeless. There's a certain aspect of our faith that has to remain the same so that generation after generation will experience it regardless of all the changes that go around us, because the more things change, the more they stay the same. You've heard that one, right? And there's a lot of things that are changing. A lot of things that are changing. Excuse me. I can't go now to dinner without seeing somebody either at my table or at tables nearby taking a picture of the food that they're eating. Are you one of those people? I know I've got them in my family. They go ahead and they take a picture of the chocolate cake, or they take a picture of the lobster that's in front of them, or whatever it is. And I'm going like, wow, check it out. It really must be noteworthy. Not too long ago, I asked this individual, about their family. Oh, the kids are all grown, and the wife is doing great, and everybody's doing fantastic. You haven't seen them in a long time, but everybody's doing good. I said, well, great. Well, why don't you show me some pictures? He went through his phone. All his pictures were of food. Didn't even have a picture of his own daughter. And I'm going like, my, how things change. I lived in Miami for about 30 years. And as you know, that Miami is a very different kind of city. Anybody been to Miami, you know that over there everybody honks. I mean, the honking between cars to cars, it almost sounds like they're communicating to them some sort of honk language. And they use it even like for good things. A beautiful woman's passing by, they honk at her. Somebody crosses in front of you and they don't like the way you're crossing, they honk at you too. It just becomes like ingrained into it. I come over here after living in Miami for 30 years, and I realize I'm in a different place. I'm driving into Pass-A-Grille. I'm coming over here, and I realize, church members might be cars right in front of me or cars right behind me, or they might be the ones that are walking across the way. I better watch my Miami with honking, because I don't know how people will interpret it. So it turned out about a good year and a half ago, while I was still fairly fresh here, that I'm waiting at the light over by the Don Cesar, and it's a red light, and then the light turns green and the car in front of me doesn't move. So I go ahead and I wait, and I wait, and the light turns red, and the car didn't move. So I go ahead and I sit there and I say, okay, fine. Person didn't move, it's okay. Then the light turns green, and the car is still not moving. And I go, what? You know what, there might be a problem. So I go on over, and I go over to the door, and I see the woman there at the steering wheel, and I said, is everything okay? Are you doing all right? And you know what she's doing? She's scratching lottery scratch-off cards. Because she won 3 out of 5, and she thought she was on a streak, so she kept on running it. And she thought she was sitting in a good luck zone or something. And this good luck zone was getting in the way of my good-naturedness. And so at that moment, I turned into a full Miami person. I said, get out of here! Move on, will you? Turns out she's seated right over there. But to break patterns is very important. To break patterns is very important not only because of our behavior, it's not only what God is calling us to do, but it's also because it gives us a new chance to reinterpret things. One of the novels I read some time ago is called Mother of Pearl. And in that novel, there's this character who says that there's 8 sides to every person and 8 sides to every situation. So if you think about a conflict, there's more than just me and her or me and him and the one that's watching. There's 8 different ways of viewing it. And it stayed with me, even though it's been several decades since I read that novel, because it taught me there's more ways to look at something. There's different ways of interpreting. I'm going to go ahead and overlap this with the gospel now. Jesus is asking his disciples, who do you say I am? Now that's a question that's been asked throughout the centuries. That's a question that's been asked time and time again. That's probably a question that's been asked of you. And I'm wondering, have you tried answering that question from a different perspective? Have you tried answering that question from a different point of view? Have you tried looking at it from something other than the pattern that you're in? And I know that some of us answer that question depending on how we were raised, depending on the church that we were raised in, depending on the language that was made part of our God culture. And for some people, their God culture is very father-oriented. They pray to Father God. For some other people, it's very, very feminine, and they like to use feminine adjectives and so forth for God. For some other people, it's very Holy Spirit-ish, and they're always saying words that are neither male nor female, neither Jesus nor God. It's kind of like very Spirit-like. And yet, for some other people, it kind of makes you wonder, where exactly are they standing? I've been asked this question. And I decided some time ago that it must be because of who I am. I get tested time and time again by church members and non-church members wanting to know exactly who do I say Jesus is. And the difficulty here for me is that I would like for people to not mimic me. I would like for people to not necessarily follow what the pastor says. What's more important is what Jesus is to you. Not so much to the tradition, not so much according to the scriptures, but what does Jesus mean in your life? And so it's got to be different between male and female. A woman's experiences are very different from those of a man. It's got to be different between African American and Anglo. It's got to be very different from child to adult. It's got to be very different, in so many different ways. So if you're a person that was imprisoned for a long time and you were serving time, your experience of Jesus is going to be very different from the person who had, a life without a blemish and with not even a speeding ticket. Who is Jesus to you often depends on your experiences, but sometimes also depends on your viewpoint, your glasses. I've been told, and this is a joke that you may have heard before, that Jesus was African American because he's always referring to people as brother. That Jesus was Italian because he was always talking with his hands. That Jesus was Californian because he had long hair. That Jesus was Floridian because he was always walking around barefoot. And so forth and so forth. But the joke pertains because from our point of view, what is Jesus? So the answer I've given to people, and the answer I'm going to give you today, is an answer that I feel very comfortable with. But it may not necessarily be yours. It may not necessarily be the one that you want to hold on to. And I want to let you know that that's okay. In other words, we're not to become a creedal church where everybody signs on to a certain creed and this is exactly how you must believe. But we're to be more of a community church, a covenantal church. And a covenantal church means that people come from different walks of life and they covenant to be together in this community regardless of their differences. And so whether you come from an African American background or an Italian background or a Floridian background or a Californian background, no matter what your background is, no matter your viewpoint, your tradition, whether it is very traditional or very radical, we covenant to be together. And that's more important than exactly who you say Jesus is. For creedal churches are out there. We've all seen them. May have been a part of them. And those are the churches where you kind of have to sign on at the bottom, usually a confirmation class. This is what Christianity is, and this is how I've learned it, and this is how it's going to be. And then it doesn't change. It's static from confirmation class to deathbed. So what you've learned at 15 is to be exactly what you learned at 30, is to be exactly the way that your faith is to be at 60, which is to be exactly the way your faith is to be at the age of 90. Whereas in a covenantal church, we recognize the fluidity of it. That what I believed at age 15 may not necessarily be what I believe at age 30, which may not be exactly what I believe at the age of 90. Because our lives have gone through a journey. And so as a covenantal church, where we always like to say no matter who you are or where you are in your journey of faith, you are welcomed here, it means that we may have a different answer to who we say Jesus is. But more important than the answer is how do you live it? How does it show in your life? How does it show in your small daily occurrences when someone's cutting you off in traffic, or when someone's asking for money outside of the Burger King, or when you have to make a decision? The decision be very small or very big. How you use your money or how you don't use your money, how you use your language and how you don't use your language, how you relate with others or not. All that is to exemplify our relationship with Jesus. I think that's more important. And I think that's what Paul was talking about. Paul wasn't so much worried about the details and the boxes that we fit in. Do we fit into this box perfectly or do we not fit into the box perfectly? But rather, how is it that we're turning our body, our lives, into a living sacrifice? So who do we say Jesus is? Jesus is, for me, that love that comes to me, that tells me that regardless of all my faults, regardless of how I have limitations, that I'm still a child of God and I'm still loved and accepted for who I am. That regardless of how I may not believe or how I may not act, I'm still accepted by God for all that I am. Jesus is that bar that I hold in my life. And it's that bar that I use it to measure my day. So that at the end of the day, I consider, was today a day when I loved my neighbor? Was today a day when I was able to show that love for my neighbor in all its ways? Jesus is, for me, the way that we bring people together, the way that we ought to exemplify the God of love by making room for everybody. Jesus is, for me, the way that I understand God. When I take a look at God and I take a look at what God is asking me to, I look at it through the prism of Jesus. And through that prism of Jesus, I go ahead and I place my priorities in some sort of order that would make sense. And that may not make sense the next day, but that's okay because the next day I've got another opportunity to do it all over again. What is Jesus to you? How do you live that meaning? May it be something that we're able to offer to all people. May it be something that challenges us from moment to moment, person to person, relationship to relationship, regardless of how we move, regardless of how set we are in our ways, or how willing we are to change our ways. And we find with every day an opportunity to express to people our faith through our life, our living sacrifice. Amen.